All right, welcome everybody to the third session of our process and event endeavor, let's say. Welcome, Alexander. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So today we're talking about the tribe and how it's dealing with death, basically. And that is tribal poiesis and its relationship to Mortido. So, but let's start easy. So tribal poiesis is a very important term that there's a whole chapter on tribal poiesis in the book. But would you just give us a primer, like an introduction of what you mean by tribal poiesis and how it works? Like what do you mean by that?
Well, there was a huge revolution in 20th century thinking, often credited to Gilles Deleuze and his partner Félix Guattari, about autopoiesis. Actually, it was a couple of Chileans who came up with the term. I think it was used in 1972 for the first time by some Chilean anthropologists. But anyway, the point is that it's called self-organization, and it's a very common term these days. For example, if you observe a flock of birds and how they can, they together dive or something like that and move back or whatever, and you see the movement with this flock, it's kind of fascinating that the entire flock knows instantly how to move together as a flock. And of course, in the past, this was explained that there would be a God who controlled everything, the kind of supernatural power that controlled nature itself. So these birds would then know to behave perfectly, like if they were like a ballet that had a director of some kind. Now, all of that is gone now. Philosophy has killed theology in the sense that we don't believe in any of those things any longer. And therefore, the term self-organization came into the picture. And I was always fascinated by the history of the term, and also how weird it actually is in a world where we're looking for causes and effects all the time. I don't disagree with the fact that there is a cause to an effect, except that some effects can have many, many causes that actually collaborate into that specific effect. So an effect doesn't have to be determined by the cause. There's no strict one cause leads to one effect. Rather, there's always a multitude of causes involved in every effect. That's the right way to do Aristotle's cause and effect theory today. So the question is then, why the word self in the first place? You know, I'm an enemy of individualism. I also thought Deleuze himself and his best friend Foucault did a really good job of killing the individual in philosophy, realizing that there's no atom. There's actually a multitude of things involved in anything that happens, so that the world exists of relations. And these relations produce relata. So an object is always produced. It's always a product of loads of different relations and their effects on one another. We know, for example, that gravity affects everything else, meaning that everything has some kind of gravity to it. So anything that has physical existence of any kind whatsoever has at least a small gravitational pull on everything else in the universe. So even in physics, this applies. So I just thought, isn't there a better term for human beings to understand how things are born? Because poiesis is the Greek word for birth. So where does a novel thing come out of? And since we are philosophers of time, we're not philosophers of space, we start with time first, it has to be along the time axis that we're thinking about how something is born. And this is how we came up with, I think, the most beautiful term in our entire work for me and Söderqvist, which is the term tribopoiesis. Because tribu is then, of course, Greek for tribe, and collective isn't really what this is about. This is about tribu because among human beings, when a child is born, it's always said that a woman gives birth to a child, a man's sperm was certainly involved, even with Virgin Mary. And so the child is born, but we always say that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, in Barton Söderqvist's philosophy, you could argue that it takes a village to even give birth to a child. There are so many causes involved in a child being born. For example, who fed the mother when she was pregnant. All those things are involved. So there's so many things that are involved in something being born that it makes more sense for us as human beings to understand both ourselves and the world from the perspective of tribopoiesis. So this is where the word comes from. We're basically knocking out autopoiesis. Once you start applying tribopoiesis onto everything, you'll discover that there is no autopoiesis involved in anything at all. There is a multitude of reasons, there are a multitude of relations involved in any given set of relations, and relations can lead to relata. So they can be an object. For example, you, Tom, or me were objects in the sense we could be the products of a number of relations leading to our existence. And this is called relationalism. It starts with Hegel, but it peaks with Alfred North Whitehead in America, and certainly with Gilles Deleuze in France. So this is again why Whitehead and Deleuze are like, you can read Whitehead and Deleuze in parallel and discover why these philosophers inspired me and John intensely, because they're relationalists.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned autopoiesis, and I mean, I think the Chilean scientists were Maturana and Varela, and they were biologists, exactly, and Uribe, and later Niklas Luhmann took the concept to apply it to systems, to social systems, right?
Yeah.
And there's a way, you know, how they create themselves, basically. So that was his 70s, 80s model of how societies, and he had a big kind of discourse with Habermas about it. But if you
Luhmann is perfect, but here's the perfect case. Luhmann does not allow for any individuals or any atoms in his sociology. He only speaks about
right,
multitudes, but he still uses the term auto, phrases. Auto is self. So it's kind of there's something inconsistent to it, and we want to get rid of it. So since we don't use the word individual anywhere in our books, we say individual, because it's a more proper term. It also takes a certain effort as a philosopher to sit down and say, okay, we banned the word autopoiesis entirely from our philosophy. We never ever use it. And we have to find another word for it. This is how we came up with the term autopoiesis, which we, of course, then from now on will use in our work, because the better description of things are born. So something dies, negation, leaving the possibility for something new to be born, the negation of the negation. And the negation of the negation, once we leave Hegel and start looking at large systems, which Luhmann is brilliant at, by the way, are then tribopoetically. So the tribopoetically, something new can be born and replace what has died.
can you give us an example of how exactly, you know, what the elements or how the processes of tribopoiesis are, or the functions or roles that are kind of, you know, embedded in that process?
I will go even one step further. As is often the case, and this is when you become a philosopher, people were approaching relationalism very sloppy.
Can you repeat that? The connection was kind of
Relationalism
bad.
sounded very hippie good, and that's using the term relationalism, but in a very sloppy way. Okay, if you're going to kill object as first category, philosophy, for example, in the moral context, like there's a subject and there's an object, and there's a relation between the subject and the object. Or in psychoanalysis, the child is born, comes into the world, and there's a relation between the child and the mother, which is being replaced by the self in relation to the world. And what we do is actually create the sense of world first, and then in the middle of the world, there's this emptiness, there's this void, and that's a self relation to the world. This is Freud, for example. So we have these theories already out there about relations and what relations can produce, but people were treating relationships very sloppily. So we got interested and we said, why don't we dig deeper into that and see what we can get out? What are relations, and why would relations be first category? And very often when people say, well, relations are first category, relations produce a lot, they then come back and say, because there are things and the relation between the things. And if they started by using the word there are things ontologically before they have the relations, they've actually just contradicted themselves. There are relations, and out of relations come things, must be the first condition for describing relationalism. But if relationism is such an attractive offer, and if this is what Whitehead and Deleuze and the guys are getting at, and it's a way to get rid of Kant, and of course Hegel supports it because Hegel sees nothing but dialectical contradictions everywhere he looks, then the question is, where do you start? So let's take relationalism seriously, which is kind of answering your question, but it's just having a deeper version of that question. What if we take relation? What does it mean that relations exist before the relata? What relates to what? And it's weird, it's a bit like in string theory, in physics, is that, well, the strings aren't there. There are no strings. There are just vibrations. But the only way to perceive those vibrations and understand the power of those vibrations, when you start looking at the larger picture in string theory, is to understand there's nothing that vibrates. It really is a vibration. And whatever object vibrates is only something we can see in hindsight, because there was nothing there that started vibrating. It's not like us suddenly vibrating on a chair. The vibration is there and there's nothing there to vibrate. And of course, on microscopic scales, that's possible. Now, we've basically put string theory aside in physics, and it's more like string theory we might return to in the future because we're not getting anywhere with it. But at least it's an interesting idea philosophically to think, what does it mean that something just vibrates but there's nothing there? And this is exactly how relationalism must work. There must be something there that oscillates that's not even there. And maybe when it freezes or when it collides with another relation, a relata can occur. Now, okay, so you sit there and you're tripping with your best friend one day, and suddenly you discover that, oh, wow, this is so weird, because actually a relation on its own would not make any sense. It's actually when two relations collide with each other and interfere with each other that something called relata could occur. Well, that makes sense, because in the most minimal sense, relationism would be that. It would be that a relation on its own does not produce its own relata. A relation of its own colliding with another relation, a bit like something warm vibrating is colliding with something cold, it chills it down, and suddenly therefore it's frozen, it starts looking like an object. It's a bit like that, but it's more like, think of it like two relations colliding with each other somehow, and if they're colliding with each other, out of that comes relata. Okay, has anybody really thought that through and described relationalism that way? Well, Whitehead was sort of hinting at it, but not really. Okay, great. And we could do philosophy here. So what are the consequences and what are the conditions? Let's start with the conditions. What are the conditions for relations to occur? Well, we are allowed to think that there are objects that on their own, without relations, have no meaning and no existence, but can exist as ideas. Sounds weirdly Platonistic, doesn't it? Not really, because we're allowed to think that without giving them any existence. So we just call it, we can allow ourselves to think that something subsists, but like something is there, but it hasn't materialized yet. Okay, then we started thinking, okay, so there's virtuality and potentiality in philosophy. There's potentiality and actuality, and there's a lot of talk about virtuality and actuality. We started looking into it, and even Deleuze was sloppy with this, because Deleuze goes between virtuality and actuality, jumps in between, but he has no potentiality in his philosophy. And we're just like, why do we think these concepts through thoroughly? So virtuality means that something has yet to exist. It could exist in the future. You can't say that it has any potency. It's a bit like it takes somebody with a match to turn it on or something, because otherwise it cannot exist. So on its own, it has no potency. And virtuality is not a potentiality. The difference is that virtuality is just something from the future that has yet to exist. It just subsists like something out there that could exist. Potentiality would then be the same thing, but with potency added. What is great with that is that if you then let two virtualities collide with one another, they can become a potentiality. And a potentiality, with all these different potencies, with all these different possibilities, with all the different things it could be in the next moment, could then break down into an actuality. It turns out that physicists love these ideas because this explains physics with a new type of language, where you can, for example, have a field that breaks down into a particle. It's just a perfect example of that. But we're not physicists, we're metaphysicists. But it's nice to know that physicists probably love the theory, because it strengthens that the theory is useful. So then we discover we have a VPA. We have three different things. We have virtuality, potentiality, and actuality. Now, in what order would these three things occur? Well, obviously, the virtuality that strictly subsists would have to be first. It's pure future. Think of it as pure future, very Deleuze way of discovering pure future, right? The potentiality would then be the collision of virtualities. So virtualities collide, they come into existence. They go from subsistence into existence. They come into existence. What happens is that the virtuality gets a potency. It can become something, therefore we must allow it to exist. Oh, sorry. Somebody came to the room. It's a secret who. Okay, so so that's a potentiality. But then the actuality is just a great way of saying that once something has broken down and it's become this one thing, it's an historical fact. And actuality is a historical fact. So what is weird about this, but incredibly creative, is that we are so used to talking about now, as now is the only thing that's real. The future isn't here yet. The past is now an established fact and can't be changed. You can't do anything about the past. Like you just said, you have to just love it, accept it as it is, more funny, which is correct. But the weird thing is that actually it's wrong to describe the world that way, because there is something distinctly unfinished about now, right? So now it's actually on the side of the field in physics. But after the now, when we start observing what just happened, we discover the particle, and therefore we discover an actuality, which is history fixed. So because nobody bothered to separate these three terms and actually use all three, which to me makes perfect sense, nobody done the proper theory to fulfilling the Hegelian revolution, because Hegel always had the three, Hegel always made a distinction between past and present and future, very distinct different things. And because you know all three, you can then start talking about virtuality as a quality of the past. Potentiality is when virtualities meet and first relation occurs. This is where relationalism starts. Relationship doesn't start in whatever is out or whatever is virtual. Relationship starts with potency. It starts with some kind of power. We think of existence as something powerful. Something exists, it's powerful. If it doesn't have any power at all, if it's just a vague idea or something like that, which virtuality kind of is, then why ascribe potency to it at all? Because we can't. But in the now, potency is always added, and that's the P, and afterwards it becomes actuality. We call this the VPA axis. It's not in chapter 3, triple poiesis, but it actually explains triple poiesis, because obviously triple poiesis is weirdly a potency. It's not an actuality. It's a potentiality. The triple poetic is a potential to the future. There's still freedom involved in potentiality. With actuality, all freedom is gone. So Hegel, of course, the damn genius, thought this way, and Nietzsche, independently of Hegel, thought the same way. And what they did was that they said that, okay, the past must always be a necessity to us, because the past is historical fact. Factuality always resides in the past. It's like history is like a zigzag, right? Right where the zigzag is melted into the zigzag pattern, is the now. And history is always the zigzagged part, and future is always the part where things are separated, not the zigzag. I think we mentioned the zigzag somewhere, but the zigzag is a perfect metaphor for understanding VPA. And this is also Hegel's idea. What Hegel says, that the past is always determined because it's fixed and it can never be changed. But the future is open. And because the future is open, we are freed. We have enormous freedom. We are active agents engaged in the world. Hegel puts a smile on the face and said, we're terrified of the freedom we have. But we have tons of freedom because history is not yet fixed. The future is not yet fixed. And looking into the future, it's indeterminate. It's indeterminate. And here's the great thing. The old quarrel in philosophy between determinism and indeterminism, which, by the way, is a quasi-argument, because determinism and indeterminism in mathematics and in physics, for example, are local aspects of a phenomenon. A phenomenon can be both determinist and indeterminist. A phenomenon can start here, and we can know when it starts is going to end up exactly there, but the path to that point can be different paths. So therefore, history can be indeterminate while it's still determinate in a larger picture. So these are just local qualities. So, but just to solve the issue of determinism in terms, we could also use the word to say the past is always determined to us when we're at now, when we're at the present. The past is always determined to us. We must love the past as it is. We must love everything that has happened up until now, as Nietzsche says, because we cannot change it in hindsight. It's a necessity. And then the contingency of the world is always in the future. As Hegel says, the contingency is always in the future. So this is the reversal of the VPA, which follows logically. What happens is that when we look into the future, we start looking for virtualities. We start looking for things that passively are waiting for us to get engaged with us, so we can have relations with them. So the whole bunch of relations that we are, the individual that we are, can get engaged in even more relations. And those relations can then get potency from getting involved with us. It's a bit like there's a passive tool over there, but if I pick up the tool and start using it, hammering with it, it gets potency from me and from the relation with me. So the hammer becomes something entirely different, becomes a tool being used by human, which is a living relation, not a dead relation. It's a living relation. And in this way, we human beings have relationships with a lot of people. And when somebody falls in love with you, they often look at you and say, oh God, my life was so boring, it was so dull, it was so dead until I met you. And now every day I'm walking on sunshine because I met you and I love, right? It's a perfect example of how relations you know, are everywhere for us, and anything that comes alive to us, anything that has meaning to us, is something we all have a relationship with. So it makes perfect sense to develop a philosophy of relationalism by taking Hegel's understanding. And with Hegel, if you're in the present, you're dealing with both the determinism of the past and the indeterminism of the future. We call that transdeterminism. We are the philosophers who invented the term. What we're saying is that the world is both determinist and indeterminist at the same time. And if you're going to look at the universe as a whole, and if you're going to look at existence as a whole, metaphysics must be transdeterminist. It is both decided and undecided at the same time. And it's precisely in this dialectical tension between the determined and the indetermined that freedom resides.
All right. So that was a lot of stuff. So can you tie it a little bit down, this VPA, to tribal poiesis, the different roles, the will to intelligence and transcendence, the inner and the outer circle, and also the shamanoids. Can you connect this a little bit more?
Wonderful. But let's go back to what you mentioned before first. This is Libido Mortido. Of course, again, you remember that I always say in our sessions here that you must think of relations in terms of relations. So when I use libido mortido here, I'm not talking about life and death per se. I'm talking about what is more libidinal and what is more mortidinal. You can see right away the mortido lies with the past and the necessity of the past. The libido lies with the freedom, the enormous freedom of the future. The libidinal is to want to go out in the world and engage with the world in relations, and even personally affect the world, and have agency, and have power over the world. So libido resides in the future, mortido in the past, and we are stuck. We're always stuck in the present. We experience the world in the present all the time. We experience our full potentiality. And I mean, this is existentially how you experience the world. You experience the world as, it's not given when you do anything. The outcome is never given when you do anything, is it? No, it isn't. And it isn't given. It's literally not given. It's only afterwards you did something. Okay, I'm taking this cup of coffee. I still haven't drank the coffee. We haven't arrived at the moment of presence when I drink the coffee, but Alexander drank coffee. And we'll have relations here in this group for Alexander drinking coffee right now. By the way, it was good coffee. It was bourbon in the coffee. Wow. I'm working on my alcoholism. I'm getting there. So every philosopher should become an alcoholic before they die. But anyway, so we can look at this literally, that our engagement in the world. I mean, I hope the next generation of philosophers could use this because it's perfect for existentialism. It's perfect for understanding what does it mean to be in the now. Well, the now is always unfinished. Otherwise, we wouldn't experience it in life. We would experience death. So the past is dead to us in the sense it's fixed, can no longer be moved. Whereas libido resides in the future. So I think it's a good place to start there with libido mortido. And then we start looking, for example, at the different wills. And here's again what's perfect use of VPA. There are three wills. The fundamental will, which we put on the side of woman and mythos, because without it, nothing can work, is the will to reproduction. This is what Nietzsche calls the eternal return of the same. The world is constantly being reborn, and it comes back as the same world. So the world is both changed every day, and it's still the same world. And it's still the same world in the more determinate sense, and it has changed in the more indeterminate sense at the same time. The world itself is transdeterminist, but the determinate part there rides on the will to reproduction. So one will is the will to reproduce it. And a lot of us human beings, especially women, tend to be very fascinated with the will to reproduce. Women remember birthdays 4 times better than men do on average. Women keep up the world, hold up the world. There wouldn't be Christmas, there wouldn't be Easter if there weren't women around who hold on to those traditions and cook food the same way they did last year and do things like that. There's something fundamental to women, much more than men, that they own and how the will to reproduce. And men love that. When men love women for that, our sexual attraction towards women is that we expect women to stand for the will to reproduction, so that men can then split into the other two wills. And here's the interesting thing. That's the will to intelligence and the will to transcendence. And the will to intelligence, the priestly will, is of course archetypologically obsessed with the past, because knowledge is always knowledge about the things of the past. It always has to be memorizing the past, checking in the past, archiving the past, going back to process the past again, to out of the past, to out of the knowledge of the past, create possible futures. So the will to intelligence is this, okay, I'm not going to be too obsessed with reproduction. I'm going to focus actually on finding out what happened. And I'm going to check out all the actualities of the world, everything that has happened. And I'm going to register them, and I'm going to make a huge computer out of them, and I'm going to get data from all over the world. And one day I'm going to create a god called the internet. And that internet is like the perfect church archive, which is perfectly possibly active constantly to reproduce the world through the knowledge. And this is the will to intelligence. That's what will to intelligence is. It's the will to knowledge. So, and once you have that in place and somebody can support that, so there's wisdom in the tribe, there's reproduction and there's wisdom. The third aspect, we need that wild young guy who's really, really strong and who wants to go out and fight a war and make the tribe expand, or at least defend the tribe so we don't get killed by enemies. And he also wants to hunt and get the food back, the protein back to the tribe so we can have a big feast tonight, and then we can get horny and we can have an orgy. So that's the hunter, right? And the warrior and the hunter, they look to the chief. And what is the will of the chief? Well, the will to expand, and the will to hunt, and the will to go to war, and the will to keep defending the tribe, to protect and provide for the entire tribe, so the tribal poiesis is possible. That resides on the chief. And this is the chiefly will to transcendence. And then we made a complete philosophy of Nietzsche's will to power. And we've explained the eternal return of the same is foundational as the Mortido, onto which you can attach the two libidos, of which the one in between is the will to intelligence, and on which, on top of that, we build the will to transcendence. So even with the VPA, it's a bit like the will to transcendence, of course, lies in the virtuality in the far future. The will to intelligence resides rather in the past, and the will to be right here, right now, resides in the will to reproduction. So you can put the three into that potency. Again, women get pregnant, give birth to children. The world is being reborn. All of those things are attached to the woman as an idea. And of course, they're attached to the mythos, because you also must put a mythos at the present, because all of history is at the present, but it's still not determined where it's going to end up. And that potentiality is, of course, a mythos reside. Whereas the history is fixed, can't change it. And somebody's really good at memorizing all of history and has a damn archive he's built into a monastery where you can go and find out all of history called the internet. And that's the priest, and that's the logos. And the pathos, the strongest human emotion, the strongest sense that we want to get somewhere, lies into the future, where the chief goes out to chase down the virtualities, and anything that comes in contact with the chief and his guys, anything that comes in contact with him gets existence by interacting with the agency of the chief.
Okay, so let's go back to Mortido, because I think the error that we can make is if we interpret it as a psychological feature like Freud did, because that's not entirely what you do. You see it as a metaphysical philosophical concept, right? Because you're not saying death drive or Mortido is something, the urge to destroy something. That's not what you mean. You're going about it like as a concept of how we structure and interact with certain architectures and features of reality itself, let's say. Right?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't do creative destruction if you use Freud's model at all. And we know creative destruction is a fact. You have to tear down a building to build something else. It's more Hegelian in the sense that something has to die to then leave the space for something new to occur. The negation must occur first before the negation of the negation possibility. That's why Hegel insists on using the term negation of the negation. It's not necessary that something replace the negation. A void can be there forevermore. But a void in itself enables, it gives the space for something new to occur. And I think this is so fundamental to human beings. I think if you look at nomadology, we had to include this idea into the nomadology itself, because I think in a tribe where people die all the time, death is so present all the time that it has to be taken into perspective. Things die all the time. Like, possibilities into the future are closed down. When the potentiality goes from an actuality, All the other possibilities except for one are closed down, and only one thing becomes the future, which then becomes the past. So the actuality becomes fixed, and that's why actuality always belongs in the past. So this is what we do. No, what we decided to do was that this is what we don't use the term death drive. Again, you see how as a philosopher, you sit down, a lot of it is about style and about which vocabulary. And after Freud, other psychoanalysts started using the proper Latin term mortido, because you use the term libido, so why not use the term mortido rather than death drive? What we do when we say mortido instead of death drive is that we don't mean the same thing as Freud did. Bless Freud, but we don't mean the same thing. Mortido is just like, it's more Lacanian. It's more like it's just this force that just pushes on relentlessly. Existence itself is mortidinal fundamentally. That's what Mortido is. It just pushes on. And of course, this is close to reproduction. Reproduction itself has this nature to it that it's just the same thing being reproduced. Yeah, it's a new day. It's a new year. The child is a new person with a new personality and a new self, but it's still just another child that was born because another guy died yesterday. And it's just a new day because the day yesterday is over and done with. And it's a new season because the old season was passed through and went through the old season, and we're now in the new season. And so there's so much of reality, which is fundamentally mortidinal. And we're very neutral about it. I think we stay with Lacan and Deleuze and Foucault and said, which it's just the way things are. Things are fundamentally mortidinal. And, you know, you can find a meteor in your garden, meteorite in your garden that just dropped down from the sky, and you realize that meteorite has been out there traveling for 10 billion years through space, and it didn't care. That's Mortido. Mortido doesn't care. Mortido is that it's just that which relentlessly powers on. You know, it's like talking about AI today. I just laugh at that all the time. People talk about AI. Could it have like a consciousness? And I'm just like, if your consciousness is no better than a fucking machine, you should go and see a psychiatrist and they'll probably kill yourself. Because it's such a poor concept of consciousness to think that a machine could feel what you do and could think the way you do, anything like that at all. A machine is a perfect example of Mortido. It's just scrap oil metal thrown together in a funny little mix, you know, even on the nanometer scale or whatever. And then you push electricity through it. And because you got storages in it, you got processing in it, then it can then compute in a way that's even faster in your own brain. So it's a wonderful tool. It's a great complement. It deserves to be called the body part of us human beings from now on. I'm totally in line with that. But it doesn't have a consciousness or anything like that at all, because it doesn't have any emotions. And that's where libido comes into the picture. Libido is pathical, fundamentally pathical. And libido is that which in us human beings, which is more than the mortido. So the mortido lies beneath and the libido lies on top of that. And the question is then, so how does libido occur in that case? And does it serve a specific purpose? Yes, it does. And here is when Barton Söderqvist is absolutely adamant. The greatest trauma ever that we all experience is our own birth. We wrote about this in Libido. We repeated in Prosevet. The great trauma is your own birth. Nobody can remember their own birth for a very good reason, because we deny it. It is first denial. It must be denied because it's so fucking horrible. You can't remember it. You know, when New Age ladies want to do rebirthing, I just have a laugh and said, no, you don't want to do rebirthing and you're not doing rebirthing. Nobody ever wants to do rebirthing. Believe me. No. Birth is like absolutely horrible. Nobody can even think or remember what it's like to be born, which is evidence that it must be so traumatic that we can't remember it. But what we do philosophically is we can dare to ask ourselves the question, before the matriarch with her smile comes and grabs us and says, oh, little darling, little baby, welcome to the world. You know, that wonderful switch. Before she does that to us, hopefully she does that to us. Before that happens, the first emotional experience of the world must be, I don't want to be here. I want to die. I want to go back into the womb. I don't want to be potency, which is a newborn child. I want to be virtuality. You know, on its own, without the mother. If you think of the child inside the womb without the mother, it's only a baby. It's only a child as a virtuality before it's born. When it's born, it gets potency, clearly gets potency to live on its own. Why? Because once it's outside and the matriarch cleans your fucking mouth, you start breathing. The fact you start breathing means you get potency. You have no sense of self. You're not even close to sense of self yet. Your entire being screams, let me back in. The way I describe biological birth is that it's the birth for the mother. It's the second where the mother realizes that she and the baby are two different entities. It's for the mother to see. You hold up the baby in front of the mother. Like, do you see this thing? It's outside now. It just started breathing. Boom! We chop off.
Right.
And suddenly the child, we chop off the umbilical cord and the child, it's its own entity. So it's a birth for the child. The child goes around for months and screams and get the tit in the mouth, and screams and get the tit in the mouth to go back into the womb. Every time we suck the tit, we're back inside the womb. Every time we suck the mamilla, we're back inside the womb. Until at a certain moment, we're ready to be born to ourselves and the birth of ourselves, which is separation. And this is libido. Libido is fundamentally the denial of the Mortido. And you're supposed to stay there. And only people who go into suicide mode or people on the deathbed are the only people who can manage to go beyond the libido and completely embrace the Mortido, and therefore they let go.
Right. So there's a passage from your book, and I want you to elaborate on that because it's a very nice passage. So the will to transcendence is driven by libido as a protest against Mortido. For libido is precisely the will that stubbornly attempts to transcend life itself as a kind of life overwhelming surplus. Mortido, however, expresses itself as a will to intelligence through binding itself in a nomadological manner to life's circularity. But Mortido's collection and processing of data would never occur if will to transcendence did not inspire and lead Mortido in the Taoist tango they are dancing together. That's beautiful. So the image of protest against death,
yes, and celebration of denial.
Right.
You are supposed to deny that you want to die. For most of us, it's unthinkable that we want to die. We're terrified of dying. We love living that much. I hope most people do. They're supposed to do that. The vast majority of people are supposed to just enjoy life, because otherwise, we would go kill ourselves and we go extinct. The reason why we're here in the first place is that the evolution has prioritized the people who want to live. And wanting to live is the denial of wanting to die. And once you realize that this is the case, it's actually logically necessarily the case. At least it can be comforting to know that if the right person, usually a very, very clever, wise woman, a matriarch, leads you when it's time for you to die. So you got cancer and you're sick, you're about to die. You only want that person in the room to give you the right mythos at that moment. And then you let go. And once you let go, the experience you have it, yeah, I'm back in the womb. Life's over. My existence as a solo entity separated from wholeness is gone. I look at it that way, but I don't want to be even close to Mortido. But I've had friends who committed suicide. I've read the suicide notes, and I see when they write the note, they've already made their mind up. They're damn sure they're going to make it. They've arranged everything in such a way you can stop them from committing the suicide. And they're writing this love letter because the last thing they want to do, the last little squeeze of libido they have in them, they want to give that to others, to tell others they're not afraid of dying. And they just made the calculation solo on their own, not told anybody, and just write the note so that they know that we read the note after that. And when we read the note after that, we know that they knew when they wrote the note that they were just on a different place on the time scale, but actually they were writing in parallel with us, so they could just let go of things. And therefore, they take the last energy they have to put it into that love letter to write to us and say, you'll do fine without me, because human beings do. And you'll get over the fact that I've left. But here's the reason why my life was finished. Here's the reason why I let the Mortido come forward and overtake me. And the libido is simply gone. I used the libido for this many years. I had the libido at these times in my life. I loved it. I loved my denial. I celebrate my denial as human beings should do. But actually now, because these reasons, because of this illness, because whatever this, my libido is now gone. And before I actually just fall into, become a head sitting nicking back and forth in a mental institution or whatever dreadful thing is left for me to do, like total pain day and night, whatever. I've decided now to take my agency, to take my future, go into the potency of writing this letter and then committing the suicide. So it's a very, very ethical act in psychoanalysis. And this explains why. So for me, Mortido is there, and it's kind of comforting to know it's constantly there. So woman is more Mortido than man in relation between them, but women love life more than men often do. So it's not about that, but in relationship. The priest is on the Mortido side. The chief is on the libido side. So the little idiot we call the chief, the young, strong guy who very often dies in warfare, very often dies during hunting, is the guy we actually put our hopes on because he defends us and he protects us and he provides for us. And that is why he's out there, needs a will to transcendence to be able to do that. And he's the most libidinal character of the three.
So as a life practice, this dialectic between libido and Mortido and tribal poiesis, our roles within. So like speaking from your point of view, so how do you navigate this dialectic in your life between Mortido and libido?
Oh, I'd say I stay with the VPA, meaning that I don't run around and say, what if I'd done things differently? I never do hypothetical situations. I don't say that, what if this had happened? Well, then everything would have been different. What if Hitler won the Second World War? But if Hitler won the Second World War, there's so many billions and billions of things that would have to be different. It's just a ridiculous idea. Do you think that? So I am very much with Nietzsche and the Amor Fati. I get up in the morning and watch the world news, and whatever has happened, I accept. If somebody just died, I accept that. Alexei Navalny died the other day when we were recording this. I wept. A friend had died. A hero had died. A Christ of Russia had died, to be honest. But he had died, and I will never ever see him again. So I accepted that. I accepted that when I heard the news. I was kind of prepared for it maybe also as well, because I knew something like that would probably happen. But, I accept everything that has happened. I consider it now as a necessity. I love it. No matter if I hate it, I still force myself to love it so I can leave it behind. I totally focus on the future, and I focus on the awareness where I'm at right now. So I'm not dreaming about something like in 23 years or whatever. I have a very, very vague idea of the far future. I sit down every day, I'm a Zoroastrian, and I meditate, and I go through the current feedback loops I'm involved with. I try to stay with the presence in the sense that I try to stay with the potentiality, because the potentiality, it's not that the virtuality doesn't have even more freedom. It does, but the potentiality is a freedom which I will exercise now. So the next moment I will exercise my freedom to do what I potentially could do exactly at that moment. And this is what interests me. I'm interested in being in the presence, like I can make decisions here, I can have agency. So what is the most important thing I will do today? And is that the best thing I could do in expansive sense? Like I and people around me could be expanded through me making that decision and pursuing that action? That's for me where I concentrate.
That's
where
very
Nietzschean ethics, I would say, but I'm a Zoroastrian, and Nietzsche and Zoroastrian agree on this. Yeah,
that's where you protest.
You can protest there as well. Yeah, exactly. A protest is right in there now. Protest, that's a good word. You could add that to the philosophy if you like to, but
no, but it's from your book, no? That libido is always kind of a protest against the inevitably of life.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the matriarchal gaze when we're born. We have the matriarchal gaze when we let go and die, and in between, we're looking for the phallic gaze. And it's kind of there's a certain vanity to masculinity in my work. Like the protest of the libido is kind of vain, because at the end of the day, the Mortido wins. But that's not the point. The point is that the freedom that's being exercised through the libido when it happens is the joy. It's a joy.
What do you mean with phallic gaze in the context?
It's that since we apply the older woman and the female wisdom onto welcoming us and generating the libido, it is that, ooh, welcome to the world. Why would she smile at us and tickle us if it wasn't for the fact that we're screaming like mad and she takes us out of the trauma? It's like, oh, welcome to the world. It's like, okay. It's like the libido is generated in this sense. You can go all the way back in psychoanalysis to people's very first experiences with hypnosis and other techniques and discover that if this happened, Very often, if the child was born underwater or something, that somebody took it out of the water, it's even more illustrated that libido is like you can breathe. So you start breathing, and the second you start breathing, you have your first sense of independence. And this, of course, where libido kickstarts instantly like that. So it's generated by the matriarchal gaze. And the same way, this very matriarchal gaze that helped us overcome Mortido so that we could celebrate the libido and enjoy the libido the rest of our lives is, of course, what we need to look for again, that mild old woman who's been around, seen 1,000 things, and comes into the room and she's just cool. And she can then hold our hand, look into our eyes, and tell us exactly the story we need to hear at that very moment, the mythos we need to hear to just say, okay, I'm ready. I'll let go. I'll take my last breath and then go to sleep and never wake up again. And this is, since we have matriarchal gazes in our imagination concerning these two experiences of coming into the life of birth and death are totally with mother, totally with woman, matriarch. The mother of the mother, the matriarch, the goddess, always there. If that is the case, then the question is the negation of that is that, well, so where do men fit into this? Well, the older man, especially the priest, for most of us, the older man who's wise and has been around, and his smile is different. His smile is cool as well. He's been around, he's seen things, but his smile looks at you and it loves you the way the matriarch does, because you're a member of the tribe. You're a member of the family. You're being loved by the community. And you'll be given your archetypes. You can live the life you're supposed to pursue within the tribe. And it's going to be meaningful because you're going to contribute. So you feel fine. So he embraces that. But what the phallic gaze does, that the phallic gaze looks at you and then it looks at the world around you, the grown-up world. That's not what the matriarch is at. The matriarch is like, she welcomes you birth and death. That's like childhood and, old age and dying. They're like, you become a child before you die as well. You often get demented and things before you die. So matriarch stands for that. But actually, and she reads you fairy tales. But the phallic gaze, therefore, as a negation to the matriarchal gaze, has to represent absolute truth in the sense that the phallic gaze looks at the world, then looks back at you. And that's why the phallic gaze is associated with the coach, for example, in the sports team. And the coach looks at the world and looks back at you and says that, yeah, I see what you're up to. Yeah, I like you. You're great. But you know what? You could have done a much better job preparing for this. That guy over there is going to beat the shit out of you today because you came out prepared. Oh, it's so tough to hear, but it's love. It's not conditional love. The love is unconditional. No. It's the fact that added to the unconditional love, which I love you, I always love you, your father figure. But really, my job is not to just sit here and bombard you with love no matter what. My job is to tell you there's a reality out there. And there's a hierarchy in that world. And there's contest, and there's rivalry. And it's a tough world. It's tough like hell. And you came in here unprepared, and you've been lazy and arrogant. You know what? I'm the guy who's supposed to tell you that because I can look at you and I say, you're going to fail today. But go into the failure. But don't come back this unprepared ever again for this type of contest. That is the phallic gaze. And in religion, the phallic gaze, we therefore put the phallic gaze in the sky. It's a sky god. We say the phallus is in the sky. And down here on flat Earth, we have Mother Earth, the grounding, what we're born into, what we return to. Even at Christian funerals, you have this wording like, you came out of Earth, you're going to return to Earth, which is totally un-Christian, by the way, but it's very Zoroastrian. It's just like, yeah, that's Mother Earth. But of course, the sky god up there is something masculine in the sense that it's something we try to impress. Something watching us over all the time, protecting us, providing for us, but also keeping an eye on what we're up to and holding us responsible for being proper adults. And the journey towards adulthood is always this search for the phallic gaze to finally see you. And when you see it, you're terrified of it, as you should be, because you are actually reflecting your own sense of self into the phallic gaze. If you haven't impressed the phallic gaze, you feel terrible, and you should.